Hey folks, we're going to be running through a tutorial for a design project that I created using Adobe InDesign for the most part. And as you can see, this was an existing project that I was actually asked to do for some English faculty for reading that they had been planning, a webcast reading during the COVID pandemic. So essentially so that folks could still share their work and still kind of work professionally regarding their practices. It's kind of one of the big things that sort of unfortunately happened because of this pandemic is that everything was kind of on pause, which means that sometimes careers are on pause. So people end up finding unique and interesting ways to kind of get through those problems. And this particular solution was organized by Professor White, who is English faculty at Diné College. So yeah, as you can see, this one is already complete. And the way that I'm going to be approaching this project is in a way we're going to sort of work backwards and try to understand this document and sort of dissect some of the things that I was doing. So obviously with with a client-based project, the first thing you need to ask are, hey, what is the content? What are the words? What are the photo assets that I'm going to need to complete the project? So you try to understand the parameters of what is necessary in order to move forward. So that's kind of the client's responsibility in a sense. It's not always the designer's responsibility to track down photos and to track down content and details, like for example, the date and the time. The title, A Late Night Reading Series, Volume 8, because more than one occurred. The title of the series in general, the spelling and the names of the folks that are going to be reading, and then just a simple directive at the bottom that is clear to RSVP for this online event. Email Orlando and let him know that you want to attend so that he can contact you and probably send you the Zoom invite link and so forth. So yeah, I mean, this is an event poster for a social media or online Zoom event rather. Let's see if we back up for a second, we can see, as per usual, you should have a graphic design folder or a course folder. And within that course folder, you're gathering assets and you're documenting yourself. You're keeping track of everything. You're not losing anything. For this particular project, it's really handy to have an assets folder. And there's the file that I'm working with, of course. This actually is the handout or prompt that I made for you guys using InDesign. And I was asking you to look at a Polish poster designer, if I'm not mistaken, for precedent and inspiration. This was a previous example of the banner that was created by another designer. So obviously I kind of used it as a precedent, all right? And this was my interpretation of that information and how I could kind of find my voice, my design voice within this particular project. And then of course, these are the precedents that I included for you to just take a look at. I'm always trying to give you this sort of information to kind of bounce ideas off of. And I don't know, I find it really motivating. So yeah, here's the project prompt. And of course, this was all made with InDesign, which is a very useful tool for creating simple PDFs or for completing projects like this one. Let me back up for a second. I think, oops, open this up one more time. Let's see, create two versions, one print and one online, of a dynamic event poster for an online art and poetry reading for Diné College English faculty. And this was literally the information that Professor White gave me when I was working on on the project. This was what was helpful so that I could find my way through the problem and towards a solution. So it's 11 by 8.5 inches. And then I also provide some pixel dimensions because you're going to have to export it at 72 dpi, appropriate for the screen. He gave me photographs. He also gave me the precedent. He did not specify a font, so the typeface was up to me. He did give me some verbiage. And this is all included right here. The spelling of the names of the folks that are being included, I think, is really important. And obviously, this is really important to an audience. Who is the audience? Who is this for? Is it for a corporation? Is it for a DIY art gallery? But the information that I was given was that these are poetry stakeholders, so faculty, academic, national. So it needs to be relatively professional and clean graphics, direct. Obviously, that would be for any design work that you're working through. But with this particular project, I think it's always, or any project, it's to know who your audience is, who will be viewing your work and looking at it. So let's back up for a second. I also wanted to show you, this is not the first iteration that I did of this project, and I designed it with the intent that I might have to actually make some changes down the road, because this is an ongoing series. So how can you create sort of a template for an ongoing series that changes? Well, my idea was that all I really need to do is change the color palette occasionally. And so that's why you see this business happening on that end. I'm going to, again, go to my folder here, and I believe if I save everything, right? So these are the recent photos that I received from Orlando for this particular iteration of the Flier. But let's see what's in here. So here's some more. Look at this. I created a text file with some content so that I could just copy and paste it in, right? This, if I'm not mistaken, this was literally the email that Professor White sent me. So Matt, in this email, photos for the next midnight transmission, blah, 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 6 photos. I mean, he's trying to be very specific with me and give me some guidance about what he's looking for. I think this is really wonderful because it's typical as far as how a client is going to want to communicate with you as a designer. So yeah, this is valuable information. And sometimes they don't always know, they're not always aware of everything that you might need, so you might have to send a follow-up email. Orlando is a pretty aesthetic guy, and he's pretty comprehensive, so I think he kind of covered all the bases. And sometimes if they don't include that information here, then maybe you can sometimes consider that just a little bit of artistic or aesthetic license to kind of express yourself within a design project, because the goal is not only to meet the client goals, but you also have the goal to, in a way, kind of meet your own goals as a designer and artist as well. So, I mean, obviously, the previous designer took a different approach to this project compared to how I did it. And so, that's one of the great things about this design program, is that you guys, through all these projects and readings and experiences, you're developing your personal voice that can be of value to clients down the road or an organization down the road. Essentially employment, right? Okay. So going back to my project folder, this was a different iteration, right? Okay, with different photos. This was another one. I think that's the one that I'm currently working on. And I thought there was another one. Huh. Well, here's a copy of the email, by the way. Pretty darn handy. Okay. Let's Okay, I'm trying to find the different, that's why it's good to stay organized, right? Let's see here. I was just trying to remember exactly what's going on here. Iteration 2, iteration 3. Let's open up this one and see what it is. This was the first ad that I made, okay? Using a different aesthetic. In fact, I think instead of using a color palette, what I was doing was I was just using cyan and magenta. Just because I really love those colors. They kind of go-to solutions. And in a similar way, actually, Helvetica is a go-to solution for me because it solves problems. And it's fundamental, simple, basic, and deliberate. So that was the first iteration that I did. So let's take a look at the second one. I wonder what this is, huh? No, that's iteration 2. I think I was giving the client different examples or possibilities. Let's see here. Show you. So somehow I had the idea that I wanted to have this line kind of running through. I didn't end up going with that iteration because I thought that was more distracting. But again, these are opportunities to find a balance between form and function and to express yourself a bit. So this was a second iteration that I actually sent to Orlando, and I'm pretty sure that we ended up staying with the simple one. Let's see what this PDF is. That's the same one. That's interesting. Yeah, well, that's okay. For some reason, I was hoping that maybe that I had exported these and kept them here, but apparently I did not. So, but yeah, this is the last and most recent one that I did. And you can actually see that there is a difference up here at the top. Originally, it was just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 participants, and then Orlando and Jesse Maloney ended up adding a couple other artists too. So I had to modify my design a little bit. So anyway, let's just kind of dissect this project a little bit. What I'm going to do actually is I'm going to create another page. So this is, all we have to do is just create another page right there, and then we can sort of create this document down below. I think I also want to show you guys my layers palette. So you can kind of see how I was thinking through all this. I'm going to make all this go away temporarily. But look at this. This is how this project started. It's with this very simple diagram, which is essentially just using the square tool on an empty layer and creating some boxes. So if I select on that box, we can see there's the cyan, and we can see the dimensions as well. So 2 by 2 inch, just squares, with exception to down here with 2 by 1.5 inches. But this was my blueprint. This was my foundation for moving through this project, because this is how I learned and have experienced design, is that when you have a foundational grid like this, you can solve problems, design problems, much more quickly and effectively, instead of like noodling through the design problem more organically. So I'm going to make sure that snap to document grid is indeed on, because I need that, because what I just did was I just selected all of these guys. Oh, and by the way, I also reduced the opacity of these guys too, just so I can see the grid in the background, which is also very helpful. So essentially what I've done is I've kind of created two grids to work with. There's the paper grid that's 8.5 by 11 with these little tiny subdivisioned units. But then I have these larger scaled grids that they're more appropriate for the context of the paper and what I'm going to be doing. So snap to grid is on. You can kind of see, look at that. It's snapping, it's talking to the document, and I've placed that down there. It's also currently on the same layer, the diagram layer. So now that that is resolved on our new document that we're going to be building, I'm going to lock it down. And I want it visible, but you can kind of see even I can toggle this on and off, and on both pages, it'll appear and disappear. So I'm trying to think of the next step that I did here. Looks like I did want to create some forms, but that, I don't know, I don't think that's a good place to kind of move to from here. Hold on. Actually, this is on the wrong layer. I think these should be on this photograph layer. So see how I can just kind of move them? So let's start with these documents or these photographs. And this actually, I think it happened when I was working with a new document, but this should be on the typography layer, right? Okay, that's better. And we're not considering that yet. This should be typography as well. So you can kind of see my document did get a little bit disorganized as I was reworking this most recent iteration. So I'm trying to clean it up, hit Command S. So let's select these photos and move them down here. But before that, you might be wondering how I got these designs, these unique kind of designs to have photos embedded in them. And you can select or create any object with the pen tool. You have to close the loop. So now we have this object, right? And then we can hit Command D, or Command D is obviously for place. And if you want to do it manually, just come up here to place. And then you navigate to your project folder where you have your photos that the client gave you living. So I'm going to go to teaching. This is my system that I have set up so I can find things. Graphic design 2, social media. And then I'm just going to show you how I can just select one of these photos and then just drop it in. Obviously, that's a little odd because we're only seeing the cheek, a little bit of the lips and nose, but we can select this object and then go up here to Object, Fitting, Fit Content Proportionally. And so it is kind of an odd object. And we can also remove the stroke. So right now this has a black line kind of surrounding the object. Well, we don't need that. We can actually go up here and remove that stroke. All right, let me zoom in on that so you can kind of see what's going on. So yeah, no stroke there. And then if we wanted to, we could actually go back and change this shape by moving those anchor points with the white arrow tool, right? Okay. So again, you know, there's overlap between Adobe Illustrator and InDesign. So this language, as far as the black arrow tool and the white arrow tool, the text frame or type tool, they call it in InDesign, all of it should look relatively familiar. But obviously we don't need this, do we? Although look what happened. For some reason, look, we're getting that. So sometimes you can come up here to Object, Fill Frame Proportionally. And see that? Cool. Yeah, I love InDesign because it's sort of a great tool for photo collage. And to me, this software application is extremely powerful, and it goes way beyond just creating a graphic design publications document. You can do fine art work with this sort of software. So let's delete that so we don't get confused or off track. So now you guys know how I may have created these shapes and then dropped particular photographs within those shapes to represent the clients. And by the way, I do a lot of sketching within the software. You may feel more comfortable sketching actually in your sketchbook, with a pen and paper, which is always a good idea. Just map out a couple basic iterations, and sometimes that's really not even visual. Sometimes you're using words, where you're thinking about the grid, or you're thinking about how, if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 images of artists that are going to be presenting, you're trying to figure out how you can fit all that information within the frame. And from my perspective, in all honesty, it should be focused on the grid. You see how these guys are directly talking to the diagrammatic grid that I included. So I'm gonna copy and paste this down here and move it. And see, I have snapped a grid on too, right? So I'm just kind of trying to rebuild this document for you a little bit. Can move that temporarily, and you can kind of see how that just kind of fits in there like a puzzle piece or something. Let the grid assist you in making these design decisions. You can't do it alone. In a way, a grid is a co-pilot. A grid is a partner. It's a design partner, and it can help you to solve and rationalize these aesthetic decisions that you're sometimes kind of wrestling with in your head. Instead of having that argument with yourself, just trust the grid. It's kind of like on your shoulder whispering good advice to you. All right. And so with this particular graphic, I decided that, see how this edge right here, this corner, the way it kind of churns in, that didn't happen accidentally. That happened because that particular module ends there and a new one starts. So again, that's the grid whispering to me, telling me, or giving me some good advice. I think the other thing to keep in mind with a document like this is that the viewer reads things from left to right, and then within like a poster type design document, their eye is going to fall down to the lower left-hand corner, and it will most likely end in the lower right-hand corner. So in a way, this move that I made, it's a visual cue for the user to kind of like, from left to right, down to the lower left, and again to the lower right. So that's kind of what I was thinking and doing there. If someone was critiquing me and if they asked me, hey, why did you do that? That would be my answer. And that's part of the game here as well. You want to have an answer for your colleagues. You want to have an answer for your professor or your design friend whom you respect. You always want to have an answer as to why you're making your design decisions. And sometimes that answer comes from the grid, because the grid is very, very reliable. So that being said, moving on, looks like we have our photographs in place, right? And they're on a specific layer. We have our diagram in place, and we're going to maintain it to be visible for the time being until we're done with everything. And when we're ready to export, we'll make it go away. So let's see, what else do we have here? I wanted to add more than just content and function. I wanted to have some form and aesthetic. I wanted to be able to express myself in this document. And so the way that I did that were with these sort of triangles, these layered triangles that are indicating movement. So you can kind of see them up here. Initially, I was using, similar to what that grid is in the background, this is cyan and magenta, and I used that for the triangles in the document. But again, like I said, I ended up creating multiple iterations of this, and I wanted to signify to the user that this was a new iteration, that it was a different event, and I did that with color. So I changed the color. So let's start with the cyan. triangles. So I'm going to select all of them. 2, 3, and you can kind of see just from what I'm doing there. Let's, I want to make sure, okay, let's copy these guys and move them down here. So we're slowly kind of building this document, but look how, let's see, I want to make sure I'm doing that right. Yeah. There we go. That's how it's supposed to be. So yeah, these triangulated forms that are kind of playing, you know, they're kind of talking to each other in a sense, from my perspective, but they're also indicating of movement from the left to the right. I kind of wanted to activate the space. I didn't want the opacity of these triangles to all be the same. And look, they're all the same color. They're all the same purple that I actually got from, I don't know what layer that's on. There we go. There's my color palette that I copy and pasted from Adobe Illustrator, by the way. I just happen to have that living in Illustrator. And I used the eyedrop tool to bring those colors in. And yeah, I'll show you guys here in a second. Actually, I can just show it to you right now. So if you're creating a triangulated form, and see how I'm closing the loop there with the pen tool, it's a closed object. I'm going to go to the black arrow tool. I'm going to select it. I don't want it to have a stroke, so I'm going to say none, no stroke. But I want to give this form, this vector form, some color. So I'm going to hit I for eyedropper, okay, and that's highlighted right here on the left-hand side. And all I have to do is just book, and I can just drop that color right in there. As soon as I use the eyedropper tool, then InDesign is actually going to populate those imported colors in this section of the document so that you can reuse them. So this may not be the exact color that I used, but it's still a form. And let's see, just to illustrate, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm trying to mimic the same move that I did here, and you can kind of see all of these triangles are just changing a little bit because this vector point just raises 2 notches. So again, it's this grid that I'm considering in that circumstance. But I'm just grabbing that anchor point and I'm just moving it to fit my needs. That vector object right now is 90%. Then it goes to 75. Then it goes to 50% opacity. And then it goes to 25% opacity. So that's actually just one color, but with multiple opacities being applied. And it creates this beautiful kind of sense of active movement from my perspective. And it's also a play on the complicated geometric form that's holding the photograph, right? So, and all of this, again, it's grid based, whether it's this primary grid or this secondary grid back there, which I can turn on and off. Okay. And by the way, you can turn that on and off with your keyboard with a shortcut, but you can always come over here to guides and grid, snap to document grid, hide document grid, show baseline grid, etc. So I could hide that document grid just like so, and I can bring it back. You know, these are really important things to just have. You're building out. I mean, the metaphor that I love using is, you know, you're building on Batman's utility belt as far as your knowledge of these applications and how to move through design problems. So it does take time. Anyway, so yeah, here's this repeating form. I think this one was 90, right? And then this was 75. And I think I just kind of experimented and I was playing with those colors to see how they would look. And then you can toggle off that diagram occasionally too, so you can see the true color. This was 50%, so I'm going to make this identical, 50% opacity. And this was 25%, okay. Yeah. Okay, so then all I would do is just, I mean, obviously you're working on your own design and you have your own ideas as to how to complete this project. Um, but if I were to want to change some of these shapes or whatever, I could do so with this white arrow tool. I can grab those anchor points, and even those anchor points, you might notice that they're snapping to the grid. Um, so yeah, but that's not what I wanted. So I'm going to delete this business because I've already done what I wanted, and that was down here. I think it's also a good time to mention, see how the power of layers. Currently, the photographic layer or the photographs layer is on top of this triangle's cyan layer. And obviously you can see the residue from my previous process because it's no longer cyan and magenta. But I was trying to give myself some cues. I was naming those layers appropriately for the colors. So I might change this to purple. And all you do to change a layer name is double click into it. And you can change this to purple. So, but yeah, it's important to keep in mind the order of your layers. Because this photographs layer is on top of that layer, and that's why this purple fill information is not obscuring the faces of the folks presenting. So layer management and layering order are very important. The diagram, because that's not going to be visible for the long term, that's on the very bottom, right? But the typography, it's on the very top. Okay. And of course, the typography has not been moved yet. Honestly, this probably should have been on a different layer that I would have created later called like just color palette or something like that. But I guess I just threw it on that layer and put it on the side of the document. So, in all honesty, you're kind of saying that I break these rules as well, because I'm the only one, or I thought that I would be the only one looking at this document, but of course now it's on YouTube. So, whoops. So, yeah, let's see. Let's decide what to do next. I think what we should do is we should move these other triangles, which again, let's bring this diagram back. It's a little bit different. I'm actually breaking a rule here. This triangle did not go up to the top edge of my diagram. And I think it's because I needed some room for typography. So the information, I wanted there to be some breathing space here. So again, I'm still listening and talking to the grid, but in a way I am practicing, some judgment too, because you have to solve a design problem. We're not creating a painting here. We're creating a document that needs to be clear with information. So removing that typography, I'm going to select one and look at that's 25, 50, 75, 90. And that's interesting. That's an interesting move because this opacity is moving from left to right. This opacity is moving from right to left. And that's definitely purposeful. That was intentional on my part. I wanted there to be movement within this document, and I hope I succeeded. So anyway, I'm gonna, oops, look at it. I accidentally nudged those triangles. I'm gonna hit Command Z. So sometimes you have to select things gently. Command C, Command V, and I want to make sure that it's on the correct layer that it needs to be. And if I'm not mistaken, it can go right there. So yeah. And again, how did I make these documents or excuse me, these vector shapes? Well, I did it with the pen tool. Beautiful. And you got to close that object. You see the pen tool, that little circle that appears? Book. That means that it's a closed object, which is very, very important. Right now, if I select that object, it does have a black stroke. I can change that just so that it's more visible for you. And I'll do that. I'm going to change it to yellow. And I'm going to increase the size or the point value of that stroke so it's visible. And you can give that object a color as well. And then you can select that object, hit Command D, and again, you can place a photo in that object. fill frame proportionally. So there's Professor Jake Skeets hanging out in a vector form. Fun. Okay, but again, I'm just kind of reiterating some of this process to bring it home. We don't need this, so I'm going to delete it. But that's how I created these guys, except I removed the stroke. I added the fill with the eyedropper tool, and you can see there's that beautiful brown that I wanted to use. It's brown and purple. Looks like those are the two colors that I used. I hope it's more of a lavender, I guess. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, right to left, left to right, creating a sense of movement. And again, a lot of this work and thinking is because of that initial diagrammatic grid or array of grid forms. If I didn't have the grid lying underneath all of this business, it probably would have taken me at least twice as long to finish the project. So if you value your time, trust me when I say use the grid, okay? What's next? This was that crazy line that I was showing you, and you can see it is kind of, I mean, this makes sense, and this is on center with this particular diagrammatic form. But again, I'm trying to create a sense of movement within the document. But I think usually left to right, and then your eye would go down this way. But for some reason, I wanted this path that possibly the eye would follow as well, to look at all of these different artists, their faces, their visuals, and also the typography that eventually I was putting there. So again, playing with movement and how a user's eye looks at information, looks at visual information. That's what we're trying to unpack and explore and learn. But I opted to not have the line, but I didn't delete the layer. I just made it go away. Simple as that, because I don't have to have it in my final exported document. That's why these layers are so amazing. You can really experiment. Nothing is undoable. You can make a mistake and just either hit Command Z or put it on a layer to think about and make it invisible, and you can think about it later or process it, with some time. So we've resolved the photographs, we've resolved the triangles. The next thing we need to do is it's the typography, right? And it looks like I have 2 typography layers. The reason I had to do that was because of layering order. I wanted to play with this opacity, and some of it is obscured and some of it is absolutely clear, but the user can fill in the blanks. So if I remove this diagram, I am kind of playing with this idea of obscuring the information, although it's clear enough where the user knows that this reads as performance, poetry, art, and performance. But I do nudge those lines a little bit. I do play with those rules and I challenge them. I encourage you to do so as well. All right. If design was always following the rules that are prescribed by textbooks, I don't know, like I would be bored with design if I always had to follow those rules. So I don't expect you to do so either. I do expect you to respect the notion of form follows function, which means that the information is always more important than the aesthetic. The form follows function, okay? And that's a modern term that you'll hear as a developing artist or designer just constantly for the rest of your life. Form follows function, all right? So I'm going to bring the diagram back, and I was trying to give you an explanation as to why that typography was on a separate layer instead of this primary layer, because I wanted it to be sandwiched in between these triangles, right? And the typography layer up top. So you can kind of see I'm creating text boxes that sort of talk to this grid. That really helps me a lot. I'm also using different typography moves. So I'm using Helvetica primarily throughout the document, but this here is Helvetica Bold. This is Helvetica regular. And you can see I'm playing with the kerning as well up here. So kerning is set at 100. Let's see, that kerning is 100 as well. I wonder what the kerning is here. Look at, so I'm using two. This is Helvetica regular, but then I wanted this to stand out, or rather stand back uniquely. So that's Helvetica light. So I'm playing with typographic moves to make certain information come forward and certain information fall back. And I'm doing that with scale and also my use of different font weights. And you can also see here, look at the kerning here. Instead of it being 100, it's at 50. So these are all moves that you can play with. And I've kind of designed a system. Believe it, I guarantee you that this is 50 kerning as well. I would be out of my mind if I decided that, because these are both doing the same thing. If I give them separate kerning, then I'm losing my notion of consistency, which is really important in design. Here you can kind of see there's a consistent, consistent type box that I'm dropping in, and all I had to do was I had to do it once, and then I duplicated it and placed it appropriately, and then I just changed the names, right? And the last name was always on the bottom, and look at this. It's always on the bottom, and it's always bold, kerning 50. The first name is always on top, same size, I believe, but instead of bold, it's regular. So again, I'm pushing and pulling that hierarchy within typography. Letter forms and typography are extremely important because design or graphic design is all about visual communication. And again, form follows function. So the function, or the words and the legibility of those words, it's all very important. There's something else happening here. And it kind of ironically and appropriately piggybacks on this notion of legibility. Look what happens here. Because this photograph, she has a long name, so it's eking into the photograph, and this is bad. I can't even read that is Sarah, right? So I actually created a mask solution, and I put it on this layer. I didn't identify that layer, but that's essentially what this layer is all about. It's a mask for the typeface. So, and it's all it is. It's just a rectangle form with a white fill, right? And all I did was I reduced the opacity of that white fill a little bit so I could still see a little bit of the photograph in the background. So, but I also wanted the typeface to pop really clearly off both the photograph and whatever might be living behind, which is only white space, right? But that is another move that I made because I am well aware that this name cannot be obscured. It needs to be clear to the user. If I were to deliver that to a client and Sarah, the name Sarah was illegible, I would be embarrassed. I mean, even to let that slip by my trained eye would be an absolute embarrassment. So yeah, don't find yourself in that situation. Form follows function. I think that pretty much kind of wraps up this document. The other thing is that on the very bottom, I wanted this prompt to be very clear. So this is, the title, the iteration, the time and the date, and then the directive is down here. This could have been a little bit bigger, but in a way, I'm a bit of I consider, myself to be a subtle designer sometimes. And so this to me is a very subtle move. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Although I'm trying to stop this tutorial really quickly before I do one last thing. You were supposed to export two different types of documents. One is print and one is web-based. So to export this document after you're done, just come down here to export in InDesign. And I like PNGs in all honesty. And I'm not going to put this on in the project folder. I'm going to put it on the desktop, and I'm going to call it print. All right. And we're going to do export PNG for print. And I want the quality to be maximum, and I want the resolution to be 300 at least. And I would prefer to stay with CMYK color space, but because I'm sending out an RG or PNG, it has to be red, green, blue. So the color might change slightly. Keep that in mind. But yeah, I'm going to make a PDF, or excuse me, PNG in this circumstance. I'm also gonna, I don't want all of these to export. I only want one document to export, because remember, we created 2 pages. So you can come up here to range and say just page 1. All right, export. Let's see what happens here. Whoops, I just messed up. You know what I did? I didn't bring my mask, my typeface mask back. So again, we gotta do this one last time. Gosh darn it. All right, and range 1, we're good, export. Let's see if it ended up. You should always double check the export before you send it to a client. That goes without saying. Desktop. I've got a lot of stuff living on my desktop, unfortunately. Print, there it is. So that was the one that I messed up. If I'm not mistaken, this is the one that we actually want. So yeah, it looks pretty good to me. You can zoom in on this document as well. Not bad. All the photos are clear. It looks really nice to me. Looks clean. Really easy to print on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper too, so that Orlando or whomever can distribute this on campus, or put in mailboxes, like faculty mailboxes. Who knows? So yeah, this is an 8.5 by 11 document. We're not done yet though. Now we need to sub or export the web-based version. So export. And I'm gonna do a JPEG because I think that's more convenient for folks a lot of the times. And I'm gonna say web, right? It's going to the desktop, JPEG. Yep, we're good. I want the quality to be maximum. I want, yep, we're good here. Resolution 50, nope. 72 DPI is appropriate for the screen. That's screen quality. And if we're sending it to the screen, RGB is our best color space, not CMYK, ironically enough. Okay, so keep it RGB. Computers render color with red, green, and blue. Printers render color with cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. That's the difference. So you have to send it with the, hopefully the appropriate color. Yeah. And okay, export. I think I accidentally sent out 2 different images though. Yeah, I did, see? And so if you don't say, I only want the first page, it sent out both of them. And that's why we got web and then web 2. So if I click on this one, let's take a look and see how it turned out. You can already see that the size is quite a bit smaller, and that's because, again, it's 72 DPI. So it's built for like putting this on Facebook, for example. Okay, I hope that was helpful, folks. Have a good day. Bye.